I once had access to vintage Japan collectibles that very few people get to see. And what I learned about the value of that category still blows my mind even today. It's actually what put me on the map as a serious reseller.
Yay! Flippin' high gravy!
Welcome back to my channel. I'm Annette, and my ability to spot vintage Japan from a mile away has been one of the most fascinating journeys of my life. But this video is about so much more than my story. It's going to teach you what took me many years to learn about flipping vintage Japan. Did you know, for instance, that there are dedicated vintage Japan collectors way beyond Christmas? All they collect is vintage Japan, who will seriously pay up to add to their collections. I've got some excellent examples of items I've sold in the past for top dollar. I can't wait to show them to you. But before we dive in, there's something important that I want you to understand, and that is that vintage Japan is a massive category. We're talking everything from old desk supplies to the big-eyed dolls. And the average vintage Japan collector, so many of them are here in America, they are not focused on the cultural Japan items like the geisha or the kokeshi dolls or the kimono items, the traditional Japanese decor. They are focused more on the Americanized imports that came from Japan to the US, generally from 1950s to the 80s. That's what they are targeting. Also worth noting is that if something is stamped occupied Japan or simply made in Japan, both are desirable to collectors. It's so hard to imagine a world without online reselling today, but back in 1990, I was a part-time reseller working out of an antique mall. eBay wasn't even born yet. And that is where I had the privilege of working with a very special man named Sam. And Sam was a walking encyclopedia on antiques. He had a booth to match. He had one of those double booths that was crammed with only the best of the best, whether it was a sterling silver piece or an antique advertising display. If it was in his booth, it was worth paying attention to. Sam was also an artist, and he had an extraordinary eye for identifying quality and detail. I was absolutely mesmerized by his inventory, and unknowingly, he was teaching me how to identify detail and quality as well. A quick shout out to my mom, who taught me a lot about buying quality over quantity, so maybe I had a bit of a head start on developing an eye for the finer things. One day, Sam brought in these Noritake lusterware snack sets. The charm, the uniqueness, most of all the artistry, the painting on these pieces were absolutely perfect, and the color was honestly like nothing I'd ever seen before. I had seen lusterware before, but never at this level. I immediately had to have them, so I bought all 7 sets right then and there. Buying those snack sets actually changed how I targeted my inventory. I started seeking out vintage Japan things. I got a lot faster at noticing them, but invariably if something was brilliantly colored and painted and had exquisite detail, often really super tiny work and intricacy, I would flip it over and it was made in Japan. So here's one of the most important things to know about a vintage Japan collector and why they are willing to pay up. They know that the artistry and the craftsmanship is in a class of its own. Think about it this way. What kind of used car do most people want, and why? It's going to be a Honda or a Toyota because the longevity, the reliability is pretty unmatched. I was completely addicted to collecting Noritake, whether it was powder jars or vases, you name it. So I actually joined a Noritake collectors club dedicated to everything but dinnerware. I attended their convention in Nashville in 1993, and some people even came in from Japan. Their collections were jaw-dropping. jaw-dropping. And back then, I could recite just about every pattern, object, and design from their old catalogs. I was also super involved in an online community that focused on all the dolls, the novelties like pipe cleaner decorations. That's where I got close to several women who lived in Japan. We exchanged endless snail mail letters and packages. You haven't lived unless you have received a personal package directly from Japan. Everything is art to them. They decorate the outside of the box, the inside of the box. They fit everything together like it's a 3D puzzle with zero void space. It is crazy. Thanks to them, I was amassing a huge collection of fabrics and dolls and novelties that were almost impossible to find in the US. I still have a lot of the fabrics and some of the dolls. Can you see how special the fabrics are? The fabric itself is often thicker and more textured than what's made in the US, but the designs are classic Japan, outrageously adorable designs that are nothing like our fabrics here in the US. Some of you may remember the Blythe doll made in 1972 by Kenner. It never made it because kids found the doll scary. But did you know that Blythe was reissued in 2001 by Takara in Japan? And she has since snowballed into a massive collectible community centered around custom clothes and makeup and hair. You might even see my Neo Blythe dolls in the background of my videos sometimes. Today, my Molly is wearing a tiny pair of shorts that my mom knitted a long time ago. I didn't just collect Blythe, though. It morphed into me collecting the big-eyed cloth face dolls that are among one of the most beloved vintage Japan collectibles. And before you think, oh, I'm not going to flip dolls, stay with me here. Those dolls actually come in all sizes and styles, and they are so cherished by vintage Japan collectors that collectors will often buy just the heads to make things like ornaments by embellishing them. For a while, I designed some of them myself with details like recycled fur and real feathers, and I sold them on Etsy. Here's a quick bolo for you, actually, because I see those dolls regularly, and sometimes their bodies are really damaged or their clothes are ruined, but you can easily remove their heads. You always want to hold their heads by the hair because if you get their faces dirty, they're almost impossible to clean. One quick note is occasionally those dolls will say made in Korea, but collectors still want them. I also made miniature cloth dolls from scratch inspired from the Japanese ones. I couldn't even keep them in stock on Etsy. That's how popular that style of doll is. Then came one of the biggest thrills of my entire reselling life. I sent a fan letter through snail mail to a renowned Japanese artist known for her books and her dolls. And imagine my surprise when she sent back to me this package. Of course, it was packaged perfectly, and see the little artwork on the front. I will never part with this. Now it's much easier to understand why Mattel would have hired Japan to produce all of the early Barbie clothes and accessories. Fast forward to when I first began selling on eBay in 1999. My first big sales, not surprisingly, were vintage Japan, like this vase that sold for well over $700. I scored two of these rare face plates and sold them for $360 each. When my husband and I downsized, I did sell my beloved snack sets for $250 each. And ironically, most of them traveled back to Japan. You should know that Noritake lusterware like this has lost some value today, but vintage Japan in general has not. I scored a dozen of these salesman sample or display cards that were marked Japan, and each of the cards had 25 pipe cleaner bugs or insects on them. Each one of those cards sold for $75. Heads up that vintage Japan collectors are crazy about all the pipe cleaner novelties. Sometimes the pipe cleaners are called chenille, but Japan produced unlimited pipe cleaner creations. Sometimes they were just figurines, sometimes they were place card holders, but they were always ultra detailed and super cute. But notice how precise and well executed all the work is, even though it is such simple materials. Now are you starting to see a running theme with vintage Japan? The color, the whimsy, but detail, detail, detail. Now let's talk about how you can find these collectibles yourself. First and foremost, anytime you pick something up and it's marked Japan, dig deeper. Take these vintage slide rules. They're automatically worth more because they were made in Japan. A lot of desk supplies were made in Japan, including entire adorable sets designed for children's bedrooms. And here are some markers that sell really well, but you gotta love how confidently this seller just dumped them on the driveway for his photos. Japan is also renowned for their craft kits. They often collaborated with stores like Lee Ward's, and vintage craft kits sell well on their own, but the Japan mark makes them even more valuable. So always make sure you put Japan prominently in your listing title along with the brand name so potential buyers will see it right away. 9 times out of 10, these collectibles are painted exceptionally well, but not 100% of the time. Make sure you are actively hunting for beautiful paintwork. One of the exceptions to this rule are old chalkware pieces like this one with the day glow paint. The painting on these pieces is fairly haphazard by Japanese standards, but they are prized collectibles, especially the ones with the brighter colors and the cuter molds. Next time you're at a sale, check craft rooms for older packages marked Japan. Everything from flower stems like these to little doll heads, and usually these little bundles of stems were wrapped with long, tiny paper labels simply marked Japan that are easy to miss. Collectors don't require those labels since they can identify these collectibles without them, but you always want to show in your listing if the labels are still intact. Train your eye to watch out for the more elaborate painted vintage figurines. Here are a few examples for you. The ones from Japan will always be cuter than the rest. And here's a common clue for you: perfectly evenly painted eyelashes. Let's keep building your shopping list. Always keep a close eye out for special dollhouse miniatures. And if you pick one of them up and you say, how did they do that? That is probably a signal that it was made in Japan. Okay, only Japan could create Vaseline glass miniatures the size of a lima bean. Can you even believe these? Only Japan could take the classic Mary miniature mushroom set here and shrink it down to fit inside a dollhouse kitchen. It's unbelievable. A quick side note, I am both disappointed and astonished that Japan did not really make their mark in vintage costume jewelry like places like France. They certainly had the artistry, they certainly had the creativity and the talent. Vintage Mikimoto pearls are valuable for sure, but I don't seem to run into much more than that. Hopefully you are already familiar with vintage brands like Holt Howard and Lefton and Napco, especially for Christmas collectibles. And I could do an entire video on just vintage Japan Christmas collectibles, but I really wanted to shine a light on the broader vintage Japan collectibles. Vintage Japan toys are a highly sought after subcategory all on their own. Tin litho toys, plushies by Dakin. Look at what Japan even did with jewelry boxes. The little doll can snap on and off. Check out this little tea set I have. Even the little box it came in is beautiful. Bandai and Jmar, Shackman, Pride Creations, Holiday Fair, those are a few of the good brands that collectors actively seek out. But by now, it might not surprise you that they don't always need an actual brand to pay up. It's often just good enough to be marked Japan. Christmas pixies and elves are often at the top of collectors' wish lists, but pixie bunnies and other variations are even more rare and sought after. Here are 3 bunnies I sold a long time ago. The details are incredible, right down to the perfectly placed looped tinsel hair. If you find them, I'd recommend selling them individually as a general rule. There's significantly more money to be made that way. And even though this video isn't focused on Christmas collectibles, remember that extra details on any kind of pixie, like metallic clothing, will always bring a higher price. Let me pause briefly and thank you for watching. My favorite comments on my channel are when you weigh in and you tell me that you found something helpful or I inspired you perhaps. And if any of my videos have helped you, I would really appreciate you subscribing and giving this one a like. It probably makes a lot more sense to you now that Hello Kitty came out of Japan. That cuteness is so trademarked. Did you know there's an over-the-top Hello Kitty hotel in Japan? Vintage Hello Kitty and all the Sanrio, the Sanex merchandise practically prints money on eBay. But always pay attention to the dates on the Sanrio products specifically. They'll always be marked 1976 because that was the founding date of the company. But it's the date after that that will be the actual production date of that product. And anything that is pre-1990, do your research because you might potentially have something on your hands that is hard to find. And if you find something with only 1976 on it, that is the first year of production for Hello Kitty items. Now you've got a real gem on your hands. Sometimes you will find remint dollhouse miniatures mixed in with other miniatures at someone's house. Always pick them up because they're getting harder and harder to find. They never last on eBay. I have sold certain box sets, small ones, for over $150. You know what has helped me learn the most about vintage Japan collectibles would be my passion for the category. Nothing makes you an expert faster than loving what you sell, sometimes collect. Find a category you're passionate about, the profit will follow. This was a pretty condensed version of everything I could actually tell you about, but I hope it inspired you to start looking out for the unparalleled artistry of vintage Japan collectibles. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you on the next video.